It's an absolute pleasure to be back in our 5th consecutive Monday, Friday of our Leadership in Sports webinar. A very special guest today, really excited to have him on from his house live in Gloucestershire. Mark Bennett MBE, welcome mate, how are you? It's great to have you here.
I'm great, thanks for the invite.
Absolute pleasure, Mark. It's fantastic to have you on board. Mark is a former British Commando. He used to train commandos as well, a senior trainer, is that right? Am I doing well so far?
Yes, you're correct so far.
Fantastic. And he's the founder and managing director at PDS Coaching. Just remind me, performance is the P.
Development systems.
Development systems. There we go. I should have known that. I apologize. I've already messed up. Anyway, Mark, it's fantastic to have you here. We've got loads of content to get you through, and we're going to try to get through as much as possible. The idea of today is to obviously share some information. I'm going to try to have a conversation with Mark. I'm going to try to keep up with Mark, which is not easy. And then we'll try to get as many of you involved in the conversation as possible. Are you happy to take it away, Mark?
Yes. So success for this hour is for anyone listening to go away and have actually applicational tools that you can use that will add value to your coaching. So we're going to talk about how we can use our supervised time to positive influence how our athletes make choices and commit to the choices and review them unsupervised. This isn't just in games when you're on the sideline matches. This is in between practice sessions. How can we influence the way they think, the choices they make, and their commitment to them and their ability to self-evaluate effectively without relying on other people? So I'm going to go through a sequence. And obviously we'll discuss and get into detail. I know it's been 30 years developing this, so this is scratching the surface, but I hope you can make the connections as we go through and some of the dangers that we don't do well enough traditionally as coaches when we want the players to think for themselves. So the first stage that we have to do is we have to establish our own baseline as a coach. And that may be common sense, but what I mean by that is put a camera on the chest, film yourself, not looking at the technical and tactical, looking at which of your athletes are interacting, how are they interacting with each other, how are you interacting with them, how often are you giving them the answer, how often are you asking too many questions when actually they should be the ones already knowing the solution or doing the solution or even sharing with you before you have to ask lots of questions. So before we can start putting any intervention in that's going to influence our athletes, we've got to make sure, are we doing what we think we're doing? And in my experience, every coach I work with around the world is the accuracy of what we think we're doing is not as accurate as we think it is. So film yourself first, look back at it. If you've got another coach, doesn't have to be in a different sport, get them to watch it as well, just to see if your notes are the same as theirs, if you're missing stuff. But do not look at the technical and tactical. We're interested in how you interact. And we're looking at scanning for our athletes. Who's the quiet one? Who's just giving you the learnt answers? Who are the ones that are actually interacting when they think you're not watching? What are they like when they come on before the warm-up? What are they like when things go wrong? What are they like when you're not giving them the solution or giving them a framework to use when they have to problem solve themselves? From that, then we have to go through understanding what I call your lighthouse. And this is something I would say every coach has in their head, but what we don't often do is we don't share it with our team. And what I mean by the lighthouse is if you were to imagine how you'd want your team to play in a match, live, under pressure, what would it look like? What would it sound like? What would it feel like? So let's look at them first. Often when I do this with teams, the answer is the same, as in we want relentless athletes that are not being affected by the scoreline, that can read the game, make effective choices, and commit to the choice with intent and adapt live to the opposition without waiting for coach to give them the answer. So that's the type team we want to develop. And often when we start asking that of the players, they haven't really been asked that specifics of what does it look like. Then we've got to ask them is, well, okay, well, if that's what you explained what you want to do as a team, For you to do that in a game, what should I be doing? Because you haven't mentioned me yet when you've shared that lighthouse. And often then they will say, well, actually, we don't want you giving us the answers, coach. It should be us working it out. And then you fill in the gaps if we can't, if you see something that we haven't seen, but it should be up to us. From that lighthouse, you can then challenge them is, okay, I agree with you, but how do we have to change practice if we're going to prepare to live that lighthouse? And often then they'll say, coach, you can't keep giving us the answers. You've got to get us to figure out themselves. We have to take more responsibility for the choices we're making, our ability to review them. And the reason why I say go into that sequence is all of us would agree, well, that's common sense, but often it's not common practice because we're thinking this is the expectation of the players, but the players may not realize and think the same as we're thinking. So we really have to make that clear. And I feel often that is missed even at the highest level and down to grassroots. So that's the first element we want to look at. Now, once we've done that, we've got to get them to see the value in it. So now we're saying, okay, so what does practice need to look like? And if they're saying, right, we've got to problem solve for ourselves, we should be working things out. We shouldn't be waiting for you to tell us if it was right and wrong, coach. We should know if it was right and wrong, and we should be adjusting if it's not right. We shouldn't be waiting to come in and have a chat about it. And the statement I used here is we want players to show us the answer, not tell us the answer. Now, why do I say that? Because often, reflect back on if it's not your coaching, if you're a player or coach you've lost. How often do we get players to come in after they've done a phase of play and we're asking them tons of questions and they're telling us the right answer. They're telling us, yeah, we should have done this and we should go over here, and it's width or it's communication. So if I'm hearing players giving me the answer, but they didn't do it, my first question would be is, when did you recognize that wasn't working and you recognize the right answer or an option to change? And if they say, well, pretty much within the first few minutes, my next question would be is, why did you not do something about it? I want you to show me the answer, not tell me the answer. So now we're making the connection to them. Okay, that's now my coach's expectation of me. He doesn't want me to come in and tell me what was wrong and how to put it right. In the moment, even if it doesn't come off, coach wants me to change something that's not working. Coach is just asking me to make a choice and commit to it. Not as bothered if it doesn't come off, but I want to know that you're thinking and reading the game because we can work with that. Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely, it does. And obviously we see it all the time where athletes go to or turn around for answers towards the bench and stuff like that. If I can just ask you to slow it down, Mark, for our Spanish speakers, that'll be fantastic.
Yes, no problem.
Thank you.
So one of the things that we have to do to bring this alive now, if we want players to think for themselves, we must give them tools to enable them to think for themselves. Mm-hmm. So obviously, one of the elements we must do is take away the fear of them making a mistake. So what we need to get them to understand is, so long as you are making a choice based on what you see and committing to the choice, we can have a conversation about that. We can learn from it. So long as you're committing to the choice you're making. But what we can't do is you just do what you think you want me to do, but not read the game. What we can't do is you for not to commit to the choices because you're not sure. So it's important for them to understand, I will not be annoyed, I will not be angry at you if you make a choice and commit to it. We can have a conversation about that. What would be unacceptable is you just to do what you think you want me to do without actually looking at what's in front of you and making a choice. What is also unacceptable is that you're not committing to the choice you make. So straight away, that's our expectation we're providing for them. Then we have to bring that alive. And that is stage one. And if you think about it in reflection, how often, if you're thinking about practices before this close down, are players not doing that because they're not reading the game because of whatever reason, which we're going to go through many of the reasons why they're not. But they're certainly not making a choice based on what they see. Often they're making a choice based on what they think coach wants them to do, which is a very different thing. And that's where this lack of understanding of your expectation of a coach and their expectation of you and their expectation of a player, if that makes sense.
It does, it does. And I think you're going to take us to my favorite country to go on holiday. Is that right?
What's that?
UAE.
Yes, yes. So one of the elements that we've got to be clear is we've got to have clarity on expectation. So it can't be in our head. We can't get frustrated because they're not doing what we expect them to do. So one of the things we're asking for here is I use UAE, unacceptable, acceptable, and exceptional. So if we're asking them to pursue a type of behavior, we've got to get them to agree what would be unacceptable within this. So unacceptable would be them not understanding their role within their responsibility in the game. So they've got to know the game. What would be unacceptable is them not to scan to look for the choices. So when I talk about scanning, I'm talking about we want players to look for opportunities and threats, whether they have the ball or they do not have the ball, whether their team has the ball or they do not have the ball. They're consistently looking for opportunities and threats. That I call data capture. If they're doing this all the time, it does a lot of positive things. One is it keeps them in the present, so they're not thinking about past mistakes in their head. They're not daydreaming because they've just passed the ball, now they're chilling. They are always alive in looking at opportunities, threats. What it also does, it gives them the data, so when the ball is coming towards them, they've already made the choices up that they can do because they've had the data. Often we find players, they'll start receiving the ball and then they'll think, okay, where are the options? And now they start looking for the options. It's too late. So we want players to scan. So one of the things is unacceptable is not to effectively scan. Then what we're saying is based on what you see, make a choice and commit to it. It would be unacceptable not to do that. So just back yourself with the choice you make. Now what we're asking them to do, once you've committed to the choice, I want you to review the choice and the execution of the choice separately, not together. Okay. So the review cannot be based on the outcome. So that it cannot be based on the player received the pass or the ball went in. That's an outcome. There are too many variables. What we have to get them to understand is you can control the choice and your execution of the choice. So if you review them, that's learning. And if we can get them to do that consistently, they will do that live in a match under pressure, which means they can continue to do the things that are working and they immediately can change. So an example would be, it may not come off, but now they're recognizing their commitment and their execution was good. It was just the wrong choice. So now they can look at the other choices. Or the choice was excellent, but they did not commit, or their execution was poor. Or it was the right choice, it was the right execution. It just didn't come off that time, but it was still the right choice and the right execution. So now we're giving them confidence of actually, this is the expectation I'm asking you to do consistently when they're playing, when they're practicing, when they're in games. What also this gives us is a good questioning reference tool. Now, this is important because we know now athlete-centered is very popular, and we've got people that sit either side of a fence at what good coaching should be. So we have some coaches saying you cannot do drills, and we've got to tell them the answer. We have some now sat on the other side of the fence saying, no, you have to ask lots of questions, and it has to be all constraints and game-led. My opinion is get rid of the fence. There are times when drills or breakouts can be of use. There are times when we have to ask a question. There are times when we need to tell. But our aim should be that we don't have to tell. We don't have to ask questions. If we develop players that are self-reviewing, we can just have trigger questions. An example would be, they come off, whether it's rotation, all you're saying is, tell me what you saw. Talk to me. What did you see? So now we're forcing them straight into the review process. They may see something we didn't see. They're stood in a different place. But what we have to establish is we've now seen something happen. Either it was great and we want to see, do they recognize it? Or we think it was the wrong choice. But instead of now us getting into starting to lead them, by us asking, what choices did you see? What did you see? We're starting to get to them explaining what they saw. What they saw will determine why they made a choice. So now we can get in, okay, interesting. Now I know you saw what I saw, or now I know you didn't see what I see. Now we can say, okay, what was the reason for that choice? Now you've reflected and you've done it. Was there a different option? What do you think? Now we're getting them to start thinking and understanding game management. Now the dialogue is rich, purposeful, but short. So once we've done that a few times, we just say to them, you know when you come off, or you know when I'm shouting your name, you know what I'm after. So now we don't have to ask a question. So Billy, and we just point of an area. They've just come off transition, defense. Now Billy straight away goes, yeah, wrong choice. It was this one. Or no, I saw it. This is what I saw, committed, or commitment, or same, or I nailed it. So now we're getting them to think in the way we want to. So
Mark,
often,
can I just interrupt you for a sec? And there will be lots of coaches here that we actually had conversations around this topic before, around decision making. And your point was very clear around outcome versus process in what you just said. Now, how can coaches on the school actually take what you just said to their practices? And obviously, most of their athletes will be in environments beyond their sports that will actually be outcome orientated. Yeah, so school, university, etc. Yeah, work even. So how do we go about the fact that, okay, from now on, this is what we're going to focus on? So how do we make that click, that change, that evolution, whatever you want to call it?
good question. So the first thing we have to do as coaches is recognize the answer to that question before we share that with the players. Here's the simple fact. Results, a win or a loss, happens after a game, not during a game. So the result happens once a whistle has ended the game. Results happen by score. Score happens by the execution of the choices based on what we see. So if we think about it like that, the facilitator of performance outcomes are what we see, the choices we make based on what we see, and our commitment and execution of the choices. We have to understand results we can't control. There is too many opposition that may just be better, whatever it is, maybe a close game and it's a referee call. But what we can control how well are the players staying in the present, how well are the players understanding the game, how well are the players scanning effectively and not missing an opposition creeping around behind them or an open gap. Now what we're saying is, how can we control and develop the players' ability to make choices based on what they see and then commit to the choice they make with real intent? All of these are the facilitators to maximize our performance, which can potentially impact the best result we can. So we need to understand that as coaches, and sometimes we get caught up in the outcome a little bit too much because we're passionate, but often we need to miss what is the source of the problem. Now, one of the sources may be their state. Now, when I talk about state, their mood is now negatively unraveling. If their state is poor, their scanning will be poor. So if now they're thinking, I've now been negatively influenced, the ref has given me a bad decision I disagree with, I'm still thinking about that bad decision. I'm now no longer in the present. Now I'm not scanning. If I'm not scanning poor, I'm now not collating the data, which will influence the next choice I make. Okay. So what we have to do as coaches is backtrack to identify, I need to understand where the source of the issue was. Was it they haven't gone through the sequence? Or was it actually their game management is poor? They don't understand parts of the game, so they're seeing it, but they don't understand that's a choice. Could it be, with no pressure, they're happily use 3 different choices? As soon as you put that player under pressure, they go to the same one choice. We all do that in scouting opposition. We recognize, put this player under pressure and they'll only go to this choice. So if we're recognizing that in a player, it's up to us to put in interventions in practice to stretch them, to build their confidence under pressure that they can make more choices. But we have to believe ourselves that actually a result is a process based on facilitators of action of performance. And they all stem from state. So if our players are not in the present, that will negatively impact on their scanning. Even if their state's good, if we don't develop scanning in practice consistently often, then they will miss things which will negatively impact the choices they make. If they don't understand their game management well enough, even if they see a choice, they won't recognize it. They may continue to make poor choices. And now we're looking at the execution. So if you think about it like that, often we talk about the technical aspect of games, but actually there's a lot that comes before that can influence performance. The other thing we've got to remember is tactics are only as good as what people see, and they're only as good under pressure of the confidence of them to execute them. Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing that links into this is they have to understand the teammates around them. I'm going to use basketball as an example. You have 5 on the court that could rotate very, very quickly. If I'm on the court as a player and I see somebody that's shooting up the right in open space, I have to know, and I have to work this out in practice, that this guy can receive a fast ball from me at speed in front of them. I need to work out, I can make that pass, that option with that player on the court. Another player wouldn't be able to receive that pass at that speed because they're not sharp enough. So I do not make that pass in that moment when that player is on the court. So part of this is also not just understanding yourself as a player. We need to get players to understand. You have to understand the players around you and know what they can see. England rugby is a great example with George Ford. Great rugby player, but what he's very, very good at is recognizing the people around him, and he will only execute certain passes and kicks if he knows the people around him will read that quick enough for them to execute the option that is presented. And he won't do that with everyone on the pitch because not everyone can read at the speed he can. Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely. So basically it starts from the coach, then it starts from every player, and then it goes from understanding other team members.
Yes, because remember, if we're sharing this with them that we recognize actually results are a process that we can't control. What can we control? Performance. What is performance? State, scanning, choices, execution of choice. Execution of choice is the technical we can work on. The choices and understanding is game management and tactics we can work on. But if we don't work on the scanning and the state, even if they know the tactics and they have the technical, they'll consistently miss things and make poor choices. So what's important is if we're sharing that with the players, we have to live by it. So then if we get players not performing or in the way that we want to, we can't then start challenging them on outcome. We have to continue to challenge them on first question should be, what did you see? Because we need to establish, did they see what we saw before we can challenge them on the choice? And often we don't do that well enough, particularly in games as coaches.
Okay, I'm with you. And Mark, I'm going to take you to another scenario which I see a lot and I tend to discuss a lot. I'll see loads of coaches asking their players, especially at a young age, go and talk about yourselves about this, or go and give yourself feedback about this. Any advice or words of wisdom around what we could do to teach that review process that you're describing so thoroughly?
Yeah, so there's many elements to that, and I see so much wasted conversation from young kids all the way through to elite pros where they're just talking about everything in the game. So there's things we can do to make it easier. First thing is we make sure in that phase of practice, so everything we do in practice, we're building for match. In that part of practice, they understand what success is. So we don't get them to look at the whole game. We would say, right, success for us in this phase is effective transition, as an example.
Okay.
Then we challenge them. What would be acceptable and exceptional within transition for us of where we are right now? They then share that with us. Then we say, okay, when we come and review, when we come into groups, I'm only going to give you 20 seconds, 30 seconds in small groups. So now that they haven't got time to talk about everything, and you say to them, I only want you to review what we've agreed success is. Now, that two things happen there is one, they have to get to the point. Secondly, we don't give them much time, so therefore they can't waffle. The other thing we do is we teach them this review process. Now, I've done this with down to 5-year-old kids, is basically make a choice and commit, and then just review the choice and the commitment. Okay. So you can do it very, very simply with 5-year-olds in tennis. But what we're asking to do then is just review that in simple terms. Now, the other thing we must look for is we have to scan behaviors in the groups. Now, I won't go into, I use ninjas and assassins, which might sound a bit confusing here, but here's what we need to look for. We will have players that will always do the talking. They may be talking correct, they may be talking nonsense, but it is unacceptable for us to have that same player every time in groups giving the coach the answer or talking to or at the players. If we believe that we want a coach environment where we can stimulate players to think for themselves, we have to get our leaders or our vocal players to recognize, it's great you have the answer, but can you help me? Stevie's quiet. When you come into the group next time, can you not give them the answer, but can you stand next to Steve and ask Steve what he thinks? Because I want you to help me help Steve. One, we want to understand what Steve's thinking, but also we need to build his confidence because he's an important part of the team. So what we're doing there is we're developing good leadership as well within players, because we're not shutting them down. We're giving them responsibility to help other players. But also we're getting players to understand it's important for us to listen to our other players and then only reference what we're looking for. So they'll start reading the game better. They won't just talk about nonsense. And I see this so often. It's a challenge we have where just players start talking about everything, oftenly influenced by the score line or how things are going, but actually that's not helpful. And the other thing we have to do is if they say they're going to do something, as soon as they go out again, we have to scan for, are they committing to what they said they were going to do? Often we don't. We just watch the game again. We'll bring them in again and we'll talk about something different. So if they agree they're going to do it, we need to let them know, look, if you're going to agree something, you have to be able to do it. So what are you going to show me? They then say, right, we're going to do this, coach. Right, show me, push them back out. You don't have to say anything. It should be player first, player last. What I mean by that is players should talk first. If there's anything, whether a bit grey or a bit general, you can say, well, yeah, but what if this happens? Or can you give me some more detail on that, Stevie, like what you said there? Or, and then they give clarity. Okay, then you say, okay, what are you going to do? They then tell you what you're going to do and you just push them out, show me. Now you have to scan for, are they committing to what they said is the first thing. The second thing is it working, yes or no? If no, are they changing it or are they continuing to do what they've now recognized does not work? So when they come into the next time they come in, the first question we should be getting them to realize they need to ask is, did we commit to what we said we were going to? Did it work? Did we adapt? Now that now starts linking reviews. Often we don't link them. So they're just talking for the sake of it. They go out, they forget what they've said, they don't commit to it, they don't adapt. So we're not helping them learn. So again, just that framework is going to get them better quality, better dialogue, better listening, and it's getting them to commit to the very things they said they were going to do.
Brilliant, brilliant, mate. Look, there's I know we've got a few more bits to go through, but I think there's a couple of questions here that are worthwhile not leaving them to the end. James is asking about what are your key principles in terms of trying to create autonomy within the playing group?
And what do you mean by autonomy within the playing group?
That will be James. I'm going to try to bring him on, see if he's still here. James, you there? We're listening to you now.
Hi, hello, everyone. To empower the players to actually have the opportunity to make those decisions during the game and during the training without always referencing you as a coach?
Yeah, so
thanks, James.
Linking into using that framework we've just discussed and then actually honoring it. So what we're saying there is, we're saying to them, look, I want you to make choices based on what you see. I'm giving you permission to do that. I'm giving you permission to change things. My only principle is that you have to commit to the change and we can discuss that. So what we do then is we split the teams. So we take another team to the side and we go, okay, so what are you seeing? What are you going to do? And then we take the other team to the side. Okay, then go for it. So one of the ways we can do that is use the whiteboards. Very simple way. I always do this at the beginning of season with teams. We give them a whiteboard each, and on the whiteboard we have, if they don't even know each other yet, we just have numbered bibs of the opposition, and they just have them on a board. We say to them, all I want you to do is go and play. Your success criteria is that I want you to identify the strengths and weaknesses within the opposition as a team and individuals. When you come back in after 2-3 minutes, I want you to share that amongst yourselves and come up with a strategy to exploit their weakness and to shut down their strengths. And whatever you say you're going to do, you have to commit to. So we let them play for 2-3 minutes. We're just scanning for who's interacting, who's saying, what are they seeing. Then they go back to the group. So don't speak to you. So immediately we've taken ourselves out of the conversation and we get them to stimulate the dialogue. Only give them 60 seconds, 90 seconds. Now they have to write on the board the conclusion, strengths and weaknesses. Then they go again. Just by doing this, what we're doing is we're developing an environment where actually they're not waiting for coach to give them the answer, but there's freedom for them just to read people and make choices. The reason why it helps is because we got them to focus on the opposition, specifically strengths and weaknesses and strategies. Once I've had that, we can get them to share the boards with each other. Okay, can you share what you did? It may be 5 rotations. How were you at committing to what you said? If it's not working, how are you adapting? And once you've had that as a review, you say, well, this is how I want practice to be. I'll help you if you don't understand things, but I want you to see if you can figure out for yourselves. And I want you to read the game and make choices based on what you see. And we can have conversations about that, because I can help you understand things you may have missed. So that immediately gives them the autonomy, and I call it permission, to facilitate the type of players we want to facilitate. Now you can do, we haven't gone into yet, what I call hot one-to-ones, where you rotate players out. Okay, what are you seeing there? What could you do? Great, send them back in. Another one comes out, literally 30 seconds to a minute. Someone injured on the sideline. Okay, what are you seeing? Can you scan that team for behaviors, choices, or interaction? As soon as you see something, okay, when they come in next time for the timeout, great. Can you share that with the group? I love what you said there. So now we're developing confidence, even with the quiet ones on the sideline or injured, that they're engaged in the whole purpose of, hang on a minute, coach isn't giving us information here. Coach is interested in what we saw and the choices we made and whether we committed to them or not. And if they worked or not, did we change our choices? So it all boils down to building that approach that makes it simple for the players to understand their expectations, and then you not getting wound up when they don't do what you want them to do. If it's working, let them go. Even if it's not working, let it go, because they can evaluate it. Now, you'll get to a point where they continue making the same mistakes and they're not adapting. That's when you can step in, and that's when we can go, okay, so what do we need to change to make this effective, because it's not working? Now, if they get to the point we don't know, that's when you can share your tactical or technical knowledge. It may be for a couple of minutes, you push them back in again. Or do you want to break out, guys, 2-3 minutes, walk through something, then we go again? Yes, coach, give me 2 minutes. So there's lots of interventions, but it's all based around that first principle of the whiteboard. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I thought that was very clear. Thanks, James, for your question. I'm going to bring in Nick. Nick has got a question around scanning.
Hi, folks. Yeah, I'm curious about scanning. It's become a really fashionable sort of topic. There was even a Sports Pages article about it. Frank Lampard scanning clips doing the rounds again. I mean, you know, what would your ideas be around developing scanning in players and coaches? Yeah,
so it's not new for me, Nick. If you ever went on my delivery 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I was talking about scanning then. If I use this as an example, is how often in the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, I'm only 52, so I'm sure before my time, did people say that effective communication was an impactful part of effective team under pressure? For decades. So we recognize it, but teams are still ineffective at communication too often. So now people are talking about scanning. We have the same issue. It's great that you recognize it, but how are you going to bring it alive? So my whole point is we have to nail our review process around scanning. So the first question must be, what did you see? We need to be scanning ourselves as coaches is, where are the heads movement? What are they looking for? Another progression I use with some players and some teams, I say, okay, for this phase, for the next 2 minutes, can you vocalize what you're seeing? So we get players literally, it could be basketball, rugby, soccer, and literally they're saying, right, I'm seeing threat there, number 6 on my right, keep an eye on him. I'm seeing an opening space coming up here. There's a space coming through, overkick. I've got a block here. So what they're doing is they're verbalizing what they're saying. You're just listening. So all we're saying is, whatever, if we want to change someone's behavior, we can't just talk about it when it's unacceptable. We can't just add it in conversation. We have to put it as our success criteria for that phase of the session. And we have to keep scanning for it consistently. So one of the things, even in top teams, one of the teams that I worked with a few years ago, they're non-negotiable. Their every time thing that they review before anything was effective communication. But we had to say to them, okay, what does that look like? So we had to agree, effective communication is only effective if it has the desired impact. So we came up with the 3 A's. 3 A's was, if I'm recognizing I need to speak to somebody, I need to say it so they can hear. It's only effective if they acknowledge it and accept it. So accept would be internal, I may not see that. Acknowledge is hand touch if it's close, thumb up if it's distance, and the last A is act. They have to act on it. So if I'm not seeing any of them, it's up to me to follow it through with them. Hey, come on, Stevie. So then Stevie has to acknowledge and act. So what we're doing then, we're drawing a picture that everyone can see, everyone can live by, that's going to bring alive communication. Scanning is the same. If scanning is our critical element, we need to forget the other stuff and go, if scanning is the thing that's killing us, our number one focus area in every session is we have to review scanning first. So what it does, it keeps it alive. I think the biggest problem when we want to change these critical elements is we talk about it, we may talk about it in the dressing room, we may bring it up now and again, but unless it's number one and we keep it alive, and every time I review every practice session and game, we will not change behavior. So that's what we have to do if we want to shift. And also need to understand, what does scanning look like? What does it mean to me? Back to, I like the example of, all I want you to do is continually look for opportunities and threats. What are your opportunities? What are your threats? And I use, if we're looking at rugby, soccer, hockey, lacrosse, I use these 3 principles to get players to understand you're never in cruise. So you either have the ball. What does excellence look like when you have the ball? Now you don't have the ball, but your team still has the ball. What does that look like? What does excellence look like for you then? And now your team does not have the ball. Doesn't mean the opposition's got it, but your team does not have it. What does excellence look like for you there? If you're not in one of them 3, you are unacceptable. So we're getting people to recognize, I have the ball, I've passed the ball. I can't cruise for half a second now. I'm no longer in one of the 3. I'm now unacceptable. So then we ask them, well, where does scanning fit into those 3? Now they say, well, I have to scan all the time. So then we set the UAEs around scanning. Then all we do is we continue to get them, we review scanning first, scanning yes or no consistently, and that's what shifts the behavior. Does that make sense, Nick?
Yeah, totally. I really like it. Thanks, mate.
Okay, fantastic. Mark, can I take you, and do let me know if I'm jumping too far ahead, can I take you to this concept of unconscious bias that he talked about?
So I think it's 30 sports now I've worked with, and one of the common trends that I do see, even at elite level MBA, even at Premiership Rugby, is we have coaches that don't think some players are that smart, or don't think some player is that committed, or think they're lazy. And without realizing what they're doing is they are treating them and communicating them differently than their other players. And it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Without realizing they are part of the problem, not the solution. A common one I also hear is a lot of coaches say, Mark, this is great. They've been on my masterclass or they've listened to one of my podcasts, and they say, Mark, this sounds great, but I don't believe 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 10-year-olds could think for themselves. And that's an unconscious bias, because if you're thinking that, where are you thinking that from? And they may say, well, you know, I've worked with a few kids. And you say, okay, so what principles have you used consistently? And then they start unraveling and thinking for themselves. And it may be they didn't even realize until we had the discussion that actually they're not allowing players to think for themselves purely because they feel, well, I can't, so I'm going to help them by giving them the answer, because I want to help them, because I'm passionate about helping them. So without realizing, they're not helping the player think for themselves, because we end up with what I call rubbernecking, where as soon as a kid or a player does something, they look for coach for approval. And then we have coaches always shouting from the sideline, great, Danny, don't forget the pass over there, Stevie, brilliant there. Oh, we need to come in with Johnny. So what we're doing is then we're not allowing players to go, right, I need to figure it out. I know if I'm nailing it or I'm not. And it's these little things that we've got to step back and realize the biggest barrier to player development is often the coach's limiting beliefs in what they're capable of. And this is something we really need to change. And one of the things is just challenging yourself is, am I biased? Feel myself. Am I different with some players and others? Am I getting through to some players and not others? But is it actually down to the amount of time and effort and my relationship I've developed within those players that's causing the impact, as opposed to it's just them and me? So there's a lot of variables with that unconscious bias. But the first thing is we've got to say, just be aware of it and challenge our own beliefs. Are they negatively influencing our own interaction and behaviors that are killing the progress of the players we're working with? And often, are they dropping out of sport because we don't think they're as good as Stevie or Sarah, but actually us thinking that is negatively impacting their engagement, enjoyment of the sport, which is getting them to drop out and not turn up again.
Mate, I'm going to share my screen for about 10 seconds. And by the way, this was not in the plans. But I'll be interested to know your thoughts around this video. It's a little clip.
Neymar. Facilidade do Neymar. Levitando o jogador do Santos. Aí o Neymar protegeu. Fez o drible. Que lance do Neymar! Que laço! Gol!
Anyway, that wasn't the plans, by the way, but I'll be interested to know your thoughts around that.
Was that Bluetooth enabled, that one?
I think so. Yeah, PlayStation 4 or something.
Yeah, I think we did a podcast. It might have been with Stuart Armstrong actually, where we did that PlayStation type process. And I think we can all look at those things and recognise that there are coaches that are passionate so hard about helping their players. They continually remind them and tell them what they need to do and how they need to play it. But the big thing about that I pick up when I see those type, fun examples is, are we wanting the players to make a certain move in a certain way, to play a certain tactic in a certain way, to kick a certain ball in a certain way, as opposed to realizing it's not my way. There could be 20, 30 ways of doing it. If a player can work out something for themselves that isn't my idea, but it works, let's go with theirs. It's not about doing A, B, C, D. We're not building a machine here. We've got an organic human being that has vision, passion, ideas, and thoughts that we don't have. So we should be exploiting their ideas and not just forcing ours upon them.
Cool. Should we move on, you think? I've got a couple of reflections around joystick coaching and stuff like that. I think they're just fueling their biases, like we said. Yeah, I think we'll jump on. Do you want to go hot and cold reviews?
Yes. So if we're looking at shifting behavior, think of it, and this may be a bit deep, but think of it like this. We really know when we shift a player's behavior when they do it every day in everything they do, not just when they're in front of us. That's when we know we've had an impact in the way they see the world and they see the choices they make. So an example that I'll give you is, I also go into schools, normally inner city, rough schools, but obviously the wealthier schools are always helpful, but we always give back. We were in a city school in London, and one of the teachers was really struggling with changing the behavior of some of the pupils. They were at school where the next thing was they were getting expelled. They were in that type of school. And they had some brilliant pupils, but they had some that the teacher was just trying so hard he couldn't get his head around what they were doing. So I didn't work with the pupils, I just worked with the teachers, and we started to do what we call hot and cold reviews. We upskilled them in how to self-review, how to get the players on the non-negotiables, their pupils in the school of their behaviors. And then they just shared after every session a hot review. And it was just in WhatsApp, and they just shared, okay, my behaviors, how were they? My work on, we've agreed once we watched them filming the teacher what they wanted to focus on, and then how were the pupils. So we had all teachers doing that in the group, and they all shared their hot reviews with each other so they can give some impartiality, some challenge and support, but also it held a reflection. That happened straight after the classroom when you're still in the heat of the moment. The cold review is then a day later or that evening when you've had time to reflect. You're not in the state you were at the moment. You do the same. Self first, then other teachers or coaches, if it's coach teachers, others, and then the pupils or the players. And what we're looking for, is there any differences? Often the cold review, and if you've had a chance, you can watch a film a bit if it's practice game. The cold review is often more accurate than the hot review because you haven't got the emotions, you've had time to reflect. Our aim is to make the hot review as accurate as the cold review. Why is this important? It's important because if we're accurate of awareness of what's exceptional or unacceptable in the moment, we can change it or keep doing it. So if we now recognize I'm now unacceptable in my state, I can now develop tools to change my state, to make me acceptable, to help with my scanning and my communication. This teacher is an example of one of them, sixth form, and then he had one of the rougher classes. He said to me about 2 months into it, and I'd just meet them once a month as a live on top of the online support. And he said, Mark, I'm really annoyed with you. I said, well, why is that? He says, I'm cycling into school every day now. And I said, well, why are you annoyed at me for you cycling to school every day? He says, well, I follow your principles of life's about setting your lighthouse and then each moment making the choice that you know is the best choice to achieve your lighthouse, and just committing to the choice. And he said, Mark, I always loved cycling, and I was going on the tube every day. I'd as soon as the alarm went off, I'd press snooze, I'd wait in a bit more. I never really had a breakfast. I caught coffee on just outside the tube, and I got the tube. Now, every time I wake up, the alarm goes off, and I hear you in my head saying life's about making choices. So I get up early, I have a good breakfast, and I cycle into school every day. Now, as soon as I hear that within that teacher, I've now recognized the impact has been effective, because now they're thinking in a different way that's benefiting something that's important to them, based on need, not want. We've done this with school kids as well, and we've done it with athletes and coaches. Many coaches that go through this journey use the same tools with their wife, husband, and their kids. First rule is, if you're not managing if your state is ineffective, don't start the conversation. And then we're asking them, have they set up the non-negotiables? Are we driving behavior first? Are we making choices based on what we agree we want to achieve? And are we just committing to the choices? So the hot and cold review, I always use every team I have about 10 going now around the world. And the coaches agree after every game, they'll do a hot review. And then how many practices we agree, maybe 1 or 2 a week, we do a hot review. The junior coach goes first, the head coach goes last. So therefore the head coach's review can't interfere the juniors. And then they all do a cold review. We do that also with a lot of the pro teams with the players. So the players will have a group as well, which the coach is observing. The coaches group is separate that I'm in, and they do the same, hot review, cold review. What it allows players to do is share things that they may not have shared live on that practice. Coaches can go around afterwards in the cool down, but it gets them in a reflection process. Now, initially when you do this, remember, we're asking players to review coach as well on this. So it's player self first, then teammates, then coach. Initially, they'll just tell coach what they want to hear. Oh, coach, you were great. But very quickly, you're saying, I don't want you to tell me what I want to hear. I'm interested in your opinion. Coach then shares the coach's work on with the players. If you go on my website, there's little clips of this live where you'll see teams doing this, where the players review coach after a session, and they're sharing, actually, coach, I thought you were here. Players are disagreeing respectfully and go, well, actually, I saw this. And then the coach is asking, remind me of my work on. The players tell the coach the work on. And then the coach says, yeah, I agree with you. So now we're helping support each other through the journey, because we're realizing coach isn't perfect. Coach is pursuing excellence. And the hot and cold reviews just help that dialogue. The other thing hot and cold reviews do is they allow the coach to pick up trends, where now the coach may see that in a hot review and go, Danny, I just want to catch you before practice. I picked up something I'd like to help you with. Or, Stevie, can you speak to Danny? I know you can help Danny with that. How about meeting up 5 minutes before practice? All these little things you can pick up because you're continuing the dialogue. Importantly, once you've taught the self-reflection process. So can you see now the self-reflection process is a way of being more impartial to what I wanted to do, the choices I made and my commitment to them, and then what would I change, if anything? It's allowing them to do that. If it's kids, they can do that in school. They can do that in their, with speaking to the teacher, speaking to the parents. They can do that when they decide to pack their own bag before practice. They can do that when they decide the choices of food they need to make, or their commitment to their stretching or mobility. It's not just about when you're watching them on the court. So what we're doing now is we're saying my supervised time with them is only truly effective if I can have a positive influence on their behavior unsupervised. And the hot and cold reviews help to give that indication of where we're working with that. Does that make sense?
It does 100%. And I think there are a couple more questions here. I've just posted Mark's website on the chat as well, and I'm sure he'll share with us all his social media and how to get in touch with him just before we jumped off the call. Mark, I really want to go slightly deeper on the concept of not telling the answer, but showing the answer. Interestingly enough, I had a conversation with around 30 female hockey players last night, and 4 coaches were there. The coaches invited me to try to talk to the players around what we're trying to develop in them coaches, because there was going to be a big change in how they were going to be coached. And yeah, the debate was just fantastic. It was all around this concept of well, if you're not going to tell me now what we're going to do.
Yeah, so the show me the answer, don't tell me the answer is a very simple way to share the expectation of what we want within players. We want to build practitioners. We're building players. We're not building theorists. We're not building players that can stand on the sideline giving us the answers. We're building people that can make decisions live. So what we don't want is players to come after a game or after half time or after a timeout or after a practice phase and tell us everything they should have done in the practice or in the game, because that's no good for us. So my argument always is, if you're giving me the answer, what prevented you from doing it? Because I want you to show me, not tell me. So when did you recognize that was the right choice to make? Well, within 5 minutes. Okay, what prevented you from making that choice? Now, often you'll find is what's preventing them is their belief that coach needs to tell them to do that. They're waiting for permission. So it's not just about saying, show me the answer, tell me the answer, and get them to understand what it looks like. We have to be honest to that, where we say, okay, we're not going to do this play. Let's understand a certain shape if you want to play a shape, but we need to let them know you are the people that see angles that I do not see on the sideline. You need to know each other, the teammates around you. It's up to you to make the choice based on what you see. Because if we can do that in practice, then we can grow quicker than any other team around us, because that is something we can learn from. Making a choice and committing to it, because then we can share, okay, what did you see? What were the choices you made? If you were to do that again, what would you change, if anything? Now, the other important thing with this is we can't just challenge them when something goes wrong. We have to challenge them when things go exceptionally well. Here's the problem why. Often what coaches do, they'll only ask a player a question when something's gone wrong. So all that happens is we've developed a culture where the players think, coach is asking me a question, I must have done something wrong. Where was I? I was in defense on the left. Well, what could be wrong in defense on the left? Oh, it's this. And they'll give you the answer you want to hear. Then the coach thinks, great, they got it. It's a learned answer. And we're missing the point again. Now we're developing players that are just telling coach what they want to hear. So that is telling me two things. The coach hasn't lived in the concept of, I'm giving you freedom without fear to make choices based on what you see, because that's what I'm interested in. The second thing is the coach is part of the problem. So if a player comes off and they haven't committed to something they felt was right, and then the coach just allows them off the hook by just having a conversation, and then the player tells them the right answer, then the coach goes, fantastic. You're now part of the problem, because we've said that's okay. What we need to say is, when did you recognize there was another choice? Okay, this time, commit to the choice. Go out again, show me. So now they do that, then we can review, okay, what did you see? I saw this. What choice am I? I went for this one. That's what I saw too. Great. Would you change anything? Maybe, coach. Really? Actually, I thought it was great. Then we can give that positive reinforcement of going, no, no, no. I loved what you did there. Or they recognize it was the wrong choice, but now we're having the dialogue again. So one of the things we've got to get around is the show me the answer, tell me the answer. They need to know what that looks like. We have to be mindful. Let's not get wound up in the outcome when our aim at this stage is to get them to start making informed choices about what they see and committing to the choice. If we start discussing outcome, we will kill that whole process of them having confidence to make a choice based on what they see and stimulate the dialogue around that. So we need to be very careful how we frame the question and review based on what we just saw ourselves.
I'm with you, and I'm going to take the liberty to combine a couple of questions because I'm conscious of the time. So Genaro and Carlos, they're sending questions through around how we can adapt this methodology or your suggestions, this system, to players that have been coached for 20, 25 years, perhaps in a very different way. And again, picturing those adults, what would be your advice in terms of, well, they're taking decisions, they're committing to their choices, like you said. However, they are different to mine in my head as a coach. Okay,
yeah. So there's 3 or 4 segment answers to that question. The first thing is ask ourselves, have we spent time agreeing the lighthouse, how we want to play? So if I use that in rugby, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, everyone was following New Zealand All Blacks. Because why? New Zealand All Blacks were adapting better and quicker than anyone else in world rugby. They were making decisions live, and they had the confidence to do so, and they were relentless.
Mm-hmm.
So what we have to do, first of all, is irrelevant 10, 20 years of them just doing a certain way. We got to get them to agree what type of team we want to be. Do we want a team that makes choice based on what we want to see? So that's the first thing. Then what we've got to do is unpick the reason why that player is consistently making that choice. Now, if it's ego and fear of failure, we have to break that down. A couple of things we can do here. If obviously it's worth filming, so in cold review, when they're not emotionally, we can ask them, okay, what did you see then? What were the choices? Talk about the options of the choices you can make. Now, if it's high ego, we can't share a video with them and ask them to reflect on them, because they'll already fix to the choice they made. So it will just be loggerheads. So we find video of other players in other teams doing the same action, the same choice. And we ask them, can you review this? What were the choices that player could have made, and what are the low risk to making them? Okay. So now we get a more open response. So now they'll start suggesting, actually, here was another choice. Where's the risk to that? What are the elements? Well, the element would be the level skill of the player that you're passing to, or the choice you made in here, the risk, low risk, high risk, the player's present ability in making the choices. And we can get down to then is understanding, right, now that player does know the choices based on that, because we're not looking to self-reflect on them. Now we can start to recognize, okay, they've seen the choices, but they're still making the same choice. So we can ask ourselves, why is that? It may be, and this is very common even at pro senior level, under pressure, that's their go-to. So they know for them, that's their highest success is their preferred execution, because they're better at it. So all we do then in practice, we take that option away from them in pressure loads, in gameplay and practice. Okay, Danny, for this situation, you can't make that choice. You have to make another choice. So we stretch them in that without challenging them about the choice they made. We just take the choice away from them. The other thing we got to get them to recognize is, if we're building a team where actually I'm trusting you to make the choice and not what coach has told you to, then actually back to the review process, teach them the review process. Live, hot one-to-ones. Danny, what did you see? What were the options? Now, Danny has to share. You may find when you do that, Danny isn't good at scanning. So Danny isn't even live looking at the options, but when you share a video with them cold, they see all the options. Live, they're not scanning. So now you recognize actually the issue is scanning. So your success criteria then for that player is, Danny, verbalize what you're seeing now in this 2 minutes. So now Danny has to be present, has to scan. So it's all boiled down to get to the source of the issue. Always do the lighthouse, because that's your reference for the dialogue. But there may be the players, the issue may not be the same for every player. So we need to have a dialogue and put some interventions in to identify the source of the issue, then work on the source of the issue. So I think this is where a lot of coaches go wrong. Some of that could be unconscious bias. Well, they're this type, they've done it for this long, and therefore they can't change. For me, that's nonsense. I've worked with England Rugby, Bath Rugby Premiership, NBA, Oakland City Thunder, many other senior teams, and people change. They change based on how we interact with them and how patient we are. They get them to understand where they're going. I will say, though, some will struggle early on. We had Alan Keane, GB basketball coach. He's a head coach for Reading Rockets. Unfortunately for him, pretty much every team he has is a new team every season. And he's had Americans come over in his senior team. And the first few sessions, they are really struggling with Alan asking them, okay, what were your options? Because they've gone through a whole system where they weren't allowed to make choices for themselves. They had to do exactly what coach told them to do. So actually they didn't read the game well because they never had to read the game well. They just stood here and did this one thing. So then we just need to understand, well, the challenge is not that you don't want to, you're uncomfortable with it, your brain is burnt up because you've never had to look for options. So now we work on that patiently, we continue, they see the value to the lighthouse, and we patiently work on them. That will be their work on, and we don't just think, well, you've got to do it or I'm going to give up on you. Get them to see the value, agree an intervention, agree their work on, and consistently support them through that work on, through practice, and they will change.
Fantastic, Mark. And I'm extremely conscious we're just scratching the surface.
Yes, we are. Yes.
Some sort of miracle that we've actually touched base on most of the points that we've pre-agreed to this conversation. Look, there's loads of questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save the chat. There's loads of questions that are arriving privately as well. So I'm going to go ahead and save the chat. We'll have a conversation later on how we can get back to all these people that have been posting their questions. And then we'll try to get it to them at some point in the near future. But Mark, why don't you share with us social media, how people can reach out to you, perhaps ask you these questions directly?
Yes, so my Twitter is PDS Coach, and my website is pdscoach.com. On the website, there are free resources where lots of podcasts I talk about these. There's video examples of teams using these principles and me presenting, but also there is full team online support I give, online coach support anywhere in the world, and also the live support. So there's lots of options if you really want to get more bespoke support, but actually there's a lot of free resources that may well answer a lot of these questions because they are the common challenges. And the reason you coaches are on here is because you recognize there's elements you want to work on. There's unanswered questions because you want to pursue excellence. So your mindset is already more in line to the mindset we want of our players. So hopefully the free resource will help support a lot of those questions, but then there is further support if you want me directly.
Fantastic, Mark, and I am sure loads of people will be reaching out. For some of you, I will be seeing you tomorrow in our new course around participant-centered environments. That starts tomorrow. There is one place, if you speak Spanish and you want to join to that, or you want to improve your Spanish and you want to jump on that, please do get in touch. But Mark, I'm going to go over to you to wrap it all up, and then I'm going to open all the mics for people around the world to be able to express their gratitude for your time. So over to you, Mark.
Yeah, it's always when you have an hour in something that's such a huge process. So I hope either it's stimulated more questions or it's got you to maybe think of something in a different way. The one thing I will say is change is the toughest element for any human being. We spend a lot of time talking about changing players. Don't forget, we are the influencers of the environments. It's important to invest in your own support mechanism for your own change. Don't change 20 things. Establish your baseline. Identify the one or two things and work on them. We're ready when we're ready. We're where we are. The very principles we talk about here supporting athletes are the same principles I use to support coaches. So remember, actually invest in the influencers because they are the most important element to support the players and the students.
Fantastic, mate. We'll see you all on Friday, and Mark is now listening to you all to say thank yous.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Nick.
Muchas gracias.
Thanks, Mark. Good work.
Thank you.
Gracias. Hasta luego.